Okay, so DOM Invader, yeah, it is another passion of mine. I tend to get immersed into projects, and DOM Invader is one of those projects. And what it is a browser extension that lets you instrument the DOM and lets you see what information you pass from a source to a sink. So a source is a DOM property that enables you to pass user input. So a good example of that would be location.hash. And a sink is a function that lets you execute code or HTML. A good example of that is the eval function. And when you combine the two together, you get DOM XSS in a lot of ways. And DOM Invader makes it a lot easier to test for DOM-based XSS because it instruments all those functions and shows you as if it was reflected XSS in the actual tool, and you can see the value being sent to the sink. So it's super useful.
Yeah, the way that I like to kind of think about this is that, obviously I spend a lot of time in static analysis these days, and, static analysis is the intent to, kind of automate some of the boring parts. You shouldn't have to go and find, location dot, path name or location dot hash by default and see if it enters something dangerous. If you can kind of marry those two things together, it gives you, places to kind of immediately look when you're evaluating code bases. And, like these tools didn't really exist until, that were, free at least until, from what I've seen at least, until Burp Suite started to introduce DOM Invader. So take it away and show us how to use it.
Yeah, sure. So you go to the proxy tab in Burp and you click on Open Browser. And this will open the embedded browser. Now, when you first start, you need to make sure you pin the extension. So like you click on the plug icon and pin it. And you can see this is the Burp Suite container extension. So the container extension contains two extensions that we've written. One is a navigation recorder, which is super cool, by the way. It allows you to record actions on a website and replay them in Burp. And the other is DOM Invader. So you need to click on the plug, click on pin, and then go to the icon, DOM Invader part of the extension. And then you can switch it on just by clicking on the DOM Invader is off, and then it will switch it on. And now what you can do is you can go to a website, and here there's a simple eval test case that we've got. So we run some public test cases, and this one is just calling the eval function. So if we click on test, it'll pass a predefined canary that we've added. But if you wanted to customize that or use your canary, so here, so a canary is a random value that you use to see data pass from a source into a sink. So the random canary is used so that you can see the data flowing into the sink. So if we copy that canary and then paste it into the URL, and then what you'll see is the DOM Invader icon changes, and it's saying that it's found one issue. So if you go to the Dev Tools, and then you can see there's a DOM Invader tab.
I don't know if you can like indent by like, I don't know if you can do this, but like if you could indent in the tab itself, just so it's a little bit bigger. I don't know if you can do that though, but yeah.
I could zoom in. Do you mean zoom in?
Yes, yeah, something like that. I think that's good. Yeah, I think we're good now.
Yeah, cool. So yeah, this is the DOM Invader tab, and what's happening here is this is the augmented DOM section of DOM Invader, and there's a message tab which shows you web messages. So in this instance, we're in the augmented DOM, and you can see there's one sink being called, and you can see that random canary that I sent is passed to that sink. So if we click on here, you can see this random canary has hit that sink. So immediately you can see how this can be useful when you've got a complex web application, because you don't know where there's like millions of lines of minified code, and it's really difficult to find which sinks are being called. So DOM Invader makes that easier.
Yeah, I think the most important thing you just pointed out there is like doing like a manual code review of like a minified bundle. a lot of the time it doesn't make sense.
Yeah,
You know, you can definitely like look for strings and like APIs and like those types of things. Definitely useful. But like to find, you know, these types of things, you know, just seeing like the interactions from the website itself can give you a lot of information, which I think is really cool here. Um,
yeah. So like, if you wanted to get like where this eval code gets executed, obviously this test case is really simple because it's just to prove that eval is working correctly. But what you can do is click on the stack trace link here, and then DOM Invader will tell you open the console, and you can get a stack trace. So you go to the console, and then you can click an item in the console, and you can see that the eval function is being called there with X, and you can see your canaries in there as well.
yeah.
So in this case, it's reflected DOM because your value is being reflected in the HTML, and it's getting passed to a DOM sync. So like in this instance, if you inject a double quote, it won't, you won't be able to break out of the double quote. So in that instance, it's not reflected XSS, it's reflected DOM XSS, because the value is reflected in some, either from a source or from a variable on the page, and that variable is then used in a sync. So that value is passed to the sync.
Yeah, the one thing I like about this, which I don't know if it's actually like true to do today, but you know, you can use this to gather the stack trace. Even if it's in minified code, you can use the, you know, the braces on the left hand, you know, on the left
Yeah,
hand side where it's, you know, it's where you can expand it, and that even works for like minified code as well. So this will allow you to kind of like debug things like quite quickly. And like you can do it all in the browser, which I think context switching is the biggest killer for a lot of people doing like these kind of engagements, and like, you know, even like looking for bugs. It's like you're spending a lot of time like switching out, looking at different things, where here you're just keeping directly in the browser and you can carry on doing what you're doing, which I think is like super useful.
yeah, yeah. It just makes things a lot easier to test, and in a simplified example like this, it's hard to describe because you can see the vulnerability obviously, but in a more complex application, it's really handy.
Cool. And like, could we jump back to DOM Invader tab for a second? Because
Yeah,
I noticed there was like an exploit feature. Could you talk about like how that generally works?
yeah, sure. So what the exploit feature does is it looks at the context that it's in and then replaces the canary with a payload. So if I click exploit now, it'll replace the canary with the relevant payload for the sync. Now, this isn't foolproof. It just works as far as it'll get you the right code that you need that's going to be executed in that sync.
Yeah.
It's more of a manual tool, so you'd have to exploiting prototype pollution. It will generate a proof of concept for that, for example, but it might require editing, manual editing, in order for the exploit to work.
If I could do a quick sales pitch, have you heard of a tool that can convert characters really quickly and you can chain them all together, introducing HackVector? So I think these two tools actually would work really well together. You find an exploit, it doesn't work the way you expect, and then you technically could just like jam it into HackVector and start messing around with it and seeing like, you know, once if you can find a way to like actually get your payload to like be inserted into the DOM or reflected in the page in a way where it's going to execute.
Yeah,
Which I-
that's a good point. That's a good point.
Awesome. So we've talked about, you know, the default behavior for DOM Invader is to, you know, find cross-site scripting. So, you know, can you like talk like, because obviously not all of these things are true positives as well. So the one that you have right now is, you know, obviously a true positive because, you know, it's a string that gets inserted into eval and the canary's in a string. So it's, you know, red. But then you have like other things that, you know, like path name might not always be exploitable in some cases compared to obviously if it goes into eval, most likely, right? But you know, in some cases it might not be vulnerable. Like, could you talk about like how you might navigate some of those things to like, you know, in your own process of what you've seen when you've been using the tool yourself?
Yeah, so when I use a tool, I generally use it with a randomized canary or customize the canary to like DOM XSS or whatever. And then I inject into the interesting values. So when I exploited PayPal, for example, I injected a canary into the query parameter and then saw that they were using jQuery. DOM Invader told me that, and then I followed up and started to inject more vectors. I think a good example for this is if I go to Google. Oh, for God's sake. Right, and then if I copy the canary and I'll leave DOM Invader open, and what we can do is we can get a more realistic example. So you've got what DOM Invader does by default is look for interesting syncs. So in the configuration, after a lot of testing, what I decided to do was show the interesting syncs first. You can customize these by switching these on and off. But basically, I showed all the syncs that might cause code execution. So in this example, you can see that there's an inner HTML sync, and this is from Google's code. You can see they don't look vulnerable, and how I know that is because, well, actually, I don't know that. What I was meant to show you was you can follow up with other characters
and see how they're encoded. Yeah.
Yeah, so here you can see the double URL encoding. So here's the canary, here's the sync, so it's an inner HTML sync. So you know that 3C is less than and 3E is greater than, and you can see that %25 is the percentage. So the double URL encoding the value. So yeah, this inner HTML is not exploitable. And if you scroll down, you can quickly see, and what DOM Invader is doing is showing you the full value sent to the sync. So if you click it, that's the full value. And if you click it again, that's the canary view. So it's just showing you characters from the left-hand side and the right-hand side. So it gives you a really good indication whether this is a vulnerability or not pretty quickly.
I have one feature request for this. Like, it would be cool if, you know, so I used to have a 5-head brain idea. Like, I'm just going to inject like a cross-site scripting payload as the canary and like see what happens. But obviously that breaks a lot of things, but it technically could work, right? So I was doing that.
Already.
Yeah, that's what I was doing. So I was,
yeah,
and then I was doing that and then seeing like what would happen. I think it kind of like breaks a lot of contexts and isn't as useful as just like, you know, using, and you'll be blocked by a lot of things too. So using a default canary is nice. What could be a nice feature request is like if you include like less than, greater than, or something as like a inside your canary, or you know, part of the test suite when, like, you know, because you have other features in here too, it might be able to like remove false positives, you know, depending on the sync context, because you know, if you already know that it's encoded when you include the things from your canary, then, you know, it's probably not a true positive if it enters in a HTML, you know.
Yeah, at the minute, DOM Invader just flags whether the sync could be potentially exploitable, but we could go into more analysis and check that what you've entered. So you might have like a separation of canary and characters injected, and DOM Invader could analyze what characters have been converted and then flag the sync depending on that. It doesn't do that at the minute, but yeah, it's something that I could do in the future.
I'm not saying that because, you know, this is not useful. It's honestly 10 times better than what, you know, doing this manually, right? So I think it's truly useful. I just think that could be cool.
Yeah, good idea, Lewis. Yeah, cool.
So could we scroll back up to the top in DOM Invader? Could we talk about like the injection? Like, you know, you have like search for canary, which is nice. But then you have like inject URL params and inject forms. Could you talk more about this? Because at the moment you've just been copying and pasting, but I think you have features that also kind of do this automated as well.
Yeah, so by default, it puts your canary in there, which is super handy because you can find the canary in the sync. You can also search for the canary. So if I did a search there and then click search for canary, you can put that back. Inject URL parameters will, so let's not use Google because I don't really want to be sending traffic to Google.
I technically did this yesterday, so I'm on their bad list already.
So if we've got some query parameters like X and Y, and you click inject URL parameters, what this version of DOM Invader does is it opens the URL. So it opens this URL. it injects a canary into the first parameter with the existing value that was already there, and then it opens another window, injects a canary into the second value, and then also with the existing X value in there. So it's a way to quickly test if a site is vulnerable in any of the parameters. So we took this approach because originally it would inject every parameter, but of course that would break a lot of sites.
Hmm.
So we took this approach to quickly test a query parameter, and then you'll see the notification icon here. It'll go red if there's something interesting. So it's, for a researcher point of view, instead of it clicking and breaking every website, this time when you click on here, it will inject each of the parameters, and the DOM Invader icon will show red when it's got something interesting. So it's a quick and easy way of finding that. And
This could also be kind of like combined with param miner as well, actually, I think. You know, because yeah, and I'm also thinking about it. Like I used to like review a lot of Java applications like JSP, and common XSS would happen because like only one particular query parameter was vulnerable, and if you change the state of something else, the payload would never actually fire. So
exactly.
I think
Yeah.
this is like really useful, and you could technically combine it with other tools too. When you find like new adjacent variables, like or like new parameters that might be available, which may have been hidden, because that's kind of like what param miner is trying to do, is trying to find hidden,
Yeah. So
variables.
you would like search with param miner for hidden get or post parameters, and then run the requested DOM Invader to see if any of those are used in the sync. Yes, you could use the two tools quite easily.
So yeah, I would love to dive so we've talked about like finding cross-site scripting, and obviously
Yeah,
like there are other ways to find cross-site scripting too, and other vulnerabilities. So I would love to dive into things like postMessage, and
sure.
the other features that DOM Invader has to provide. If you
Yes.
have anything else you want to show, by the way, just ignore me and just show it, because the person who made this tool definitely has a better insight than I do. So
I'll try and keep what I'll try and do is show stuff that wasn't explained by our videos, because I've done like a video tutorial and stuff. Yeah, there's some new features like detecting cross domain leaks, which is super interesting. So what this does is when it's enabled and you've got postMessage enabled, it checks the web messages to see if the URL is placed in a postMessage request, and then it will flag that as an issue. So I think we've got a test case over here. So let's try it. Cross domain secrets.
Is this due to my knowledge might be outdated these days? Is this due to like wildcard type things, or?
Yes. Well,
Kind of.
yeah, it is. It's when you do a postMessage to a wildcard domain, but then you can control where that message is sent to,
Yep.
and steal it. So like here, we've got an example of cross-domain secrets JSON object, for example. So what this is doing is it's loading an iframe on a different domain, and then that iframe is using top.postMessage and sending the location, the URL, and the location's got a secret in it. So obviously this is a contrived example, but what happens is DOM Invader will flag this issue. So if we look in the postMessage section, you can see that DOM Invader is changed. It's saying it's found a low severity issue. So the postMessage stuff. So here, this is one message that's been sent, and these are like generated DOM Invader messages that it's tried to exploit. So it's found this low severity issue, and it tells you that it's sending from an iframe to the top window, and it's giving you the data, and it's shown that it's injected a canary. So if you click on this, you can see that DOM Invader will say a web message data has been sent from this domain to this domain. Potential cross-domain data is leaking inside this message. So it's looked at the message and saying that data is being used, and this is potentially you could potentially steal that data. So it's a pretty cool feature.
That's really nice.
You can see, if I just expand it so you can see. Yeah, so it'll work on stringified JSON data. It'll work on a JSON object or a JSON string. We've got public test cases for each of those. So sorry, go on.
So speaking about secrets, I think this is really cool, by the way. Like, could you think like DOM Invader could be extended to also just look for generic secrets in source code? I know obviously you could also do that, just probably in Burp as an extension. But I could see like, because you're dynamically pulling things in and evaluating, like it could also be potentially useful.
Yeah, so one of the requests that I've had is like, can DOM Invader look for custom syncs? So we plan to do an API in future that will allow you to do that, and as part of that, you could extend the way that it reads cross-domain data in messages and provide your own function to do that. And what's quite cool actually is a new feature of DOM Invader is that you can do sync callbacks and also source callbacks and message callbacks. So how this works is when you click on the sync callback, you can define your own function to get called.
Oh, wow.
So it'll give you like a sync details object. It'll give you a list of syncs, and then whether it's an interesting sync. And you can get information out of that sync details object. So you've got like the canary, the sync, the stack trace, the value, the URL. So you can call a custom function whenever DOM Invader finds that. So it's quite an easy way of extending DOM Invader to do with whatever you want. So I use this particular feature, for example, when I was scanning bug bounty sites. So I did a post to an endpoint that logged the data. So I could like use Puppeteer, get DOM Invader to scan a load of websites, and it would use the callback feature to log all this data, and you could see whether there was a vulnerability being found or not. And I did find quite a few vulnerabilities. I found a lot of web message stuff. I found a lot of DOM XSS on different sites.
Yeah, this is kind of like making my brain tick about how you could truly just do like if you wanted to just automate a kind of like, not necessarily like, in scope kind of mass scanning process and kind of just log the output, like using this kind of features in an automated way would, basically just give you information to go and take a look rather than you having to go to each website manually, fuzz around, etc.
Exactly.
And like that's the most annoying part. I just want to be able to like, that's why people build automation for like, subdomain takeover and those kind of things, right? Because they don't want to have to go and see if the
You don't want to do the boring stuff.
Exactly, you want to automate it. So this is awesome. I didn't know you could actually extend it further and like, add additional logging capabilities. And yeah, I could imagine, you might even be able to do like two-step function type stuff due to this additional capabilities as well. Because you can do anything in JavaScript right here. So
exactly, yeah. So it's not just like logging. What you could do is make a decision that a certain vulnerability is more important. Like you might be testing in a HTML or whatever. So you can return true or false whether to log that sync or not. So you can make a decision in the JavaScript what you think is interesting, and that's why we added this functionality so that you could decide.
Yeah, you could also do this in different like rollouts if you wanted to do like mass scanning too. Like you could start with like just logging the use of eval. If something's going into eval and it's like any type of controllable by a user, it's most likely vulnerable, right? Outer HTML, inner HTML, web frames events, probably like less on the tier because there are nuances about output encoding and like those types of things, right? So really interested to kind of like see how you could take that further, and it's very cool.
Yeah, and not only have we got the callbacks, but you can also switch off sources and syncs here. So you mentioned you wanted to find whether a valve's being used. So you can switch on and off a val here. So you could like say, okay, I don't want any of those syncs. I just want the eval sync.
Yeah, that would be nice. Yeah, because like then you could actually like do this where you could kind of have like different reporting mechanisms that you know, if eval is, you know, flagged, it's probably something you want to go and investigate immediately. If you know there's something where it's getting you know, applied to an element, probably something a little bit less you want to look at, unless it's like an href where, you know, you have the controllable component of the href kind of thing. That could be interesting, right? But
yeah, DOM Invader will flag whether you can control the start of the anchor. So
well,
it'll
that's really nice, actually. That's the biggest kind of complaint with a lot of the tools today, where, you know, it'll just flag something at the end. It was like, well, no, you want to know if you fully control it, otherwise it's kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, with the callbacks, you can define that. So if you wanted to make sure that it always began with the JavaScript URL when the anchor assignment happens and it contains a canary, then just write some JavaScript that does that and then log it true or false. When you want to log it, just return true when you want to log it.
Very cool. Now, we've shown how to like find cross-site scripting with DOM Invader. We've obviously talked about postMessage, and, you know, we've shown the second window. But there's also prototype pollution, and you know, you have attack types and things in miscellaneous that we haven't like kind of dived into yet. Could you talk more about how you might like use this to find prototype pollution? I can
Sure.
try and explain what prototype pollution is, but you'll probably be better. Basically, like in JavaScript, you have the object prototype, and it's a prototypal language, so you have the ability to kind of, you know, add additional properties or potentially poison properties, or, you know, overwrite properties using the __ proto __ attribute, which, you know, can technically like pollute other objects inside the JavaScript you know, page, or even on the server side in many cases. You can try and maybe I said that all that wrong, but you can yeah, dive into it and kind of talk about that space.
Yeah, so prototype pollution is all about inheritance, really. So you have like almost every single object in JavaScript inherits from the object prototype, and in prototype pollution, the most common target is the object prototype. So what it enables you to do is use properties that the developer wasn't expecting to be user controllable. I think that's an important point. Often they would think that this input is not being user controlled. And what a prototype pollution vulnerability lets you do is use the proto property or constructor.prototype to modify the object prototype with the property that you want to control. And then that property is used in a sync, like in a HTML sync, for example. And when that happens, that property becomes a gadget. And it becomes a gadget because you can control it through the URL or some other source. And yeah, that's how prototype pollution works, really. So
yeah, the one thing I recently like, there's a wonderful kind of series called Just JavaScript. It does cost money to buy, but it's a great read into like kind of like JavaScript mental models. And the interesting thing, like in JavaScript, there's no such thing as like nested objects. Every object is like a new object. So even if you have a property that is in like another, what looks to be nested inside one object, like let's say that, you know, you assign that value to it, it basically will just, you know, try and find, if you like say like you want to find like Gareth.foo, and foo doesn't exist on that object, it will actually just look at the __ proto and kind of like do chaining between the different objects to see if that also exists. So it was kind of, if you are interested in learning about JavaScript in general and like redefining your mental model, it's a great resource.
cool, that's a good shout. Yeah, so like the prototype pollution will use the prototype chain. So like if you've got a user-defined object at the bottom, it will go up the prototype chain till you get to the object prototype if it's an object, and then it will only inherit those properties if they do not exist on the user objects. I think that's an important point. The object itself mustn't have the gadget that you want, the property that you want to control.
Exactly. So yeah, let's talk about how you might find that with DOM Invader. It's you know, it's a fairly complicated topic to kind of understand at the beginning, but once you get the gist of it, you know, there's
Yeah,
like
it's
server
pretty
side.
straightforward when you get into it. Yeah. Okay, so if we turn off postMessage because we're not doing that, what you want to do is head over to the attack types and turn on prototype pollution. And then once you do that, DOM Invader is injecting the prototypes, uh, uh, the proto property with canary. You can see it happening quite quickly. It happens there when I was browsing to that URL. But we have got prototype pollution test cases that we can use. So, for example, the prototype pollution hash, for example, that's a good one.
I will add one thing. Even though it loads quickly, you are in Burp Suite in this case, so everything could be logged. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
so you're all good. People who still want to like take a look at that in more detail when you start using it.
yeah. So I've browsed to this test case, and this test case is, again, it's a bit contrived, but it uses a prototype pollution. There's like, it reads from the hash, and then there's a function that causes prototype pollution. So DOM Invader has flagged that issue. So if we go to the DOM Invader tab and go to the augmented DOM, you can see that it's found a prototype pollution source. So what we class as a source is where it comes from a hash or a query string, for example, and the combination of the property and that source becomes a prototype pollution source. So in this case, it's saying that proto and the technique is proto and square bracket property, and it shows the value that it's been used to discover that. So it's saying that you can pollute the prototype using square brackets, and you can test that by just clicking on the test button. And what DOM Invader has done is injected into the hash a test property value. So if we go to inspect, look at the console, and go to object.prototype,
Probably could just write .test property, right, and see if it exists.
That's weird. Let's just refresh it. I knew something would go wrong.
No, you're all good.
Let's see. Yeah, it's in the hash. That's right. Maybe the test case is broken.
Maybe Chrome changed something.
Yeah, maybe they did.
They saw that you're going to come on here today, and they wanted to
Let's
destroy
just
it.
try a new test case.
It's because you started putting canaries in that search. That's what happened.
I don't know what's going on there. Why? Like DOM Invader is not enabled and it's still not finding it. That's weird.
Maybe like reload the because we've been obviously changing things around. Like maybe reload the actual extension, see if that changes anything, and update the.
I've disabled the extension so that the test case isn't working for some reason.
Oh, I see.
So DOM Invader has found the problem. Oh, that's weird. Maybe is it a hash problem? Let's try another test case. This particular test case might be broken.
Well, I do like see like you update like your payloads all the time for the XSS cheat sheet because like the Angular stuff no longer works, right? Because Chrome made a change. So,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, a recent change was they removed the a property.
oh, it says you need to reload, by the way, because you've like changed your properties.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. I'm just gonna query string gadget. Yes, found one here. So it's saying there's prototype pollution in the search. So if I click test, this should work. Yeah, oh,
There
the
you
test
go.
has been broken. Sorry about that.
All good.
Anyway, so let's just go through that again. I'm so sorry.
No, all good. This just goes to show, like, even the experts fumble, and I think that's a great learning lesson for anyone. So,
I wouldn't class myself as an expert,
oh,
but anyway.
okay. You're a renowned author, so you can't even say anything. So,
So okay, so here we enable prototype pollution in the attack types. So we switched it on here. We click refresh, and it's found 2 prototype pollution sources. One technique is using proto.property. So sorry, square bracket property. So here we've got proto and then square bracket of the property. So it's saying there's a vulnerability there, and also that you can use constructor prototype in the property. So if you wanted to test that this is actually an issue, you can click the test button. You can see that DOM Invader has injected in the query string with the proto property, property and a test property, and then it's giving it a value. You can confirm that that's actually a problem. You can see that DOM Invader has already done it for you here in the console, but if you inspect the object prototype, you can see that the test property here has been added to the object prototype. So what that means is if you define an object, so like let's just define an object and then with a value of A, for example, and we print that to the console, you can see that that property has an A, that object has an A property and its value of 1, 2, 3. But if we also try and access the test property, you can see that that object also has this test property because it's happened from prototype pollution. So this is a prototype. This is prototype pollution because you can control the test property, and that object has that property. So you can confirm that that is prototype pollution. So you know that you've got a potential gadget called test property. So now the idea is to scan for gadgets. So to do that, what you can do is you can use a scan for gadgets button. What the scan for gadgets button does is pair the prototype pollution source with a gadget like a val in a HTML. And all you have to do is click scan for gadgets, and then DOM Invader will do some magic and find any syncs. There you go.
I was going to say, I can see that web design is your passion. I do love your website, by the way. Like all the CSS stuff you were doing was pretty cool.
Oh, thanks, mate. Thanks. Yeah, it was good fun. That I like to do stuff that that you wouldn't expect, like CSS, 3D CSS and stuff like that. It's really good fun. But anyway, yeah, it's found a gadget. So you can see that DOM Invader has gone red, and it shows 1 because it's found 1 interesting thing. And you can see that what DOM Invader has done is it's paired the prototype pollution source with the sync and the gadgets. So the number is used to do that. So it pairs the source and the gadget. And then you can see that prototype pollution is the value sent to the sync. So that's DOM Invader's code. And it thinks that the gadget is HTML. So it's saying that with prototype pollution and the HTML property, you can get DOM XSS basically. And to do that, you can just click exploit. And what it's done, it's injected proto with the HTML property because it knows that that's a gadget, and it knows that it's in a HTML sync. So it's injected some HTML to cause DOM XSS.
Yeah, this is kind of like mind-blowing to me because prototype pollution on its own doesn't always lead to an exploit. You have to kind of like normally use a gadget or like attach it to something else, like try and overwrite a property where something malicious can go wrong. Like on the server side, you can denial of service the application by like changing a value that it's trying to expect, or sometimes remote code execution. But obviously on the browser, like there's like client side denial of service and then like cross-site scripting, right? So like how can you leverage your prototype pollution string to basically actually be exploitable? And I love the fact that you've already thought about that kind of edge case and built like something that does the gadgets for it, which is beautiful.
Thanks, Lewis. Yeah, so finding gadgets is really difficult, but you can tweak how you find those gadgets. So like by default, if you go into like, there's like a prototype pollution settings cog. So you can refine how gadgets are found. So by default, it looks for 10 properties. So it's using iframes to scan for these gadgets, and it uses 10 properties at a time. But you can customize that and change the settings. So you can just switch them. Oh, you need to switch that off. So then you can scan more properties or less properties. The more you scan, the less accurate the scan will be. The less properties that you scan per frame, the slower it's going to be, but the more accurate it's going to be. So you can tweak DOM Invader to do that, and it will be faster or more accurate depending on which one you use.
I could see this already being like useful where you have prototype pollution,
Yes.
or like you find a vulnerable payload and then you just want to like use DOM Invader to try and like automate some of the kind of difficult components that you already know is going to be difficult to find, and like it might set you up for success because it's not always going to be accurate, but it might tell you like, hey, like you can overwrite this, which might lead to this, and then it's down to you to kind of figure out like, is it actually exploitable? Can I do that in the correct way, and like those types of things.
Yeah, exactly. So when we designed DOM Invader, we wanted to be able to find prototype pollution sources. So like in the query string, there's prototype pollution. We also wanted to find gadgets because if there's existing gadgets on the site, then that's bad, because if you're using a library, you might not be aware that this library has a gadget, and then later when your site gets exploited, you could then use that gadget. So if you fix the gadgets themselves, then even with the presence of prototype pollution, you won't be exploited. But yeah, so DOM Invader can work independently. So it can find you the prototype pollution source, it can find you the gadget, or it can find both together and exploit the site for you.
I absolutely love it. And I think that's a great place to stop. I've definitely taken up much of your evening. So I honestly love this. This has been fantastic. I think the main takeaway for me is that, Burp in general is generating a lot of things that you can use, in the free version, the community version, and the paid version. There's, this is available in the free version as well, from my understanding.
Yeah, it's in community. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, use this, find your first bounty with it, then buy a pro version and start hacking away is the way that I would take it. So, yeah, thank you so much, Gareth. I would love to have you on again when you've been like making more extensions and more improvements.
Cool, nice one, Lewis. Thanks, man.
And that was episode 23 of Security and Crumpets. Until next time.